the issues with child support. First, a little bit of my background. I know some of you have already heard this, but we do have a lot of new faces in the room. So, for those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Tallahassee, went to FSU for undergrad, got my undergraduate degree in business management and international business. Then went to Stetson for law school, also got my MBA at Stetson. Originally thought I was going to do business law, but did an internship during law school. Also worked briefly as a law clerk for a business law firm, and it about put me to sleep. So, my second year of law school, I was looking for a job. A friend of mine and my mother's, who still lived in Tallahassee, put me in touch with somebody from the Attorney General's office, and I ended up working there as a law clerk with the Child Support Enforcement Unit. Once I graduated law school, stayed there as an attorney, and worked there up until 2010 when I switched over and started working for Brandon Family Law Center. I now do a number of different practice areas: divorce, adoption, paternity, disestablishment of paternity, child support, custody, and modifications of all of the above, as well as alimony. Kind of my area of expertise, because of my time with the Department of Revenue, are paternity cases and child support cases. Department of Revenue, who here has either had a case or knows of somebody who's had a case with the Department of Revenue? Okay. Have those of you who have heard of those, heard the people, yelling and screaming, "I'm getting another notice from DOR and it's always wrong"? Okay. Because I work with DOR, I know somewhat more about how they work, how they operate. So I think I can serve clients a little bit better in that area, because sometimes dealing with DOR, you seriously want to beat your head against the wall. Representing them, I wanted to beat their heads against the wall quite frequently. DOR has certain mechanisms to enforce child support that are not as easily available to a private attorney. They can suspend passports. They can seize funds out of bank accounts. Take a driver's license, which private attorneys can do as well. Professional licenses. So, the Department of Revenue can cause a lot of problems for you if you do not pay your child support. Also with the Department of Revenue, though, they deal with paternity cases. Let me ask a question for you, because there are a lot of misconceptions about paternity law in Florida. If a woman gets pregnant while she is married, but separated, and there is a biological father, under the law, who is dad, legal or bio? Who knows? Legal. Yep. In Florida, biological fathers of a child who is born or conceived during a marriage to another man have little to no rights. That is something to be aware of.
Why? I mean, what can you do about it? I mean, it's too late.
Hold on. The law for a while was going towards giving the biological fathers a lot more rights. However, in Florida, it's kind of going back now. There was a trend to kind of give them the rights, and now they're pulling back on that. The law is generally 5 to 20 years behind reality and society. So that law is rooted in the presumption of legitimacy, which is something most people don't even think of anymore. Maybe back in the early 1900s, legitimacy was an issue. It really isn't in society anymore, but the law still considers it to be so. So if a legal father chooses not to give up his rights, or if the married parties reconcile, the biological father may have no rights to his own biological child.
That's the way it should be.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard a man say that.
Sanctity of marriage. Weren't you supposed to keep the wife in the kitchen with the bare meat?
No, the wife belongs to the man, so the child belongs.
Come on now.
You might want to run to your car after this.
Jeff, did I ever tell you Gina doesn't like you?
He is so good.
Okay.
Okay.
Well delivered, Jeff. Well delivered.
However, with paternity, obviously there have been advancements with DNA, etc. Jumping to another subject with paternity. There is now a statute that allows people to disestablish paternity. However, it is very strict. I will tell you guys this and pass this on to any single friends you have or people who are having children. I know it's going to get them in trouble with the woman, but always ask for DNA. In all the years I did cases with the Department of Revenue, I cannot tell you how many times both parties were saying, nope, 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 not a chance, not a chance, not a chance. Then DNA came back 0 and the guy's going, huh? Better safe than sorry, even if it gets you yelled at. Because otherwise, after 18 years later, you're still paying child support. Better to ask up front, because there is no way to undo it later if you knew or should have known at the time that you were not the father. And believe it or not, it happens. Most family law cases are not Jerry Springer, but those Jerry Springer cases do happen.
Yeah.
What?
Jerry Springer's still on.
Well, no, I think Jerry Springer's been off for a while, but has it?
I have no
I don't know.
idea.
I'm never home during the day to watch it.
Ned?
Can you say Caitlin?
So it's something to be aware of. The law does allow to disestablish paternity, but only in very specific circumstances. And the law has been very strictly interpreting that statute. So if you know somebody who suspects he may not be the father, you've got to deal with it right up front. Another thing to be aware of with paternity, if you sign the birth certificate, your dad, you've only got 2 options. You can set it aside within 60 days, or you're done, for the most part. Signature on the birth certificate constitutes an establishment of paternity. Now, I know most men, you're at the hospital. If you don't sign the birth certificate, you're probably going flying out the door. But it's something to be aware of. You've only got a certain number of days. So if you know somebody who's suspicious, who's not sure, and to let them know how to deal with it right away. And we can certainly help them with that. Otherwise, they are stuck. Because again, the law will not allow them to establish paternity unless they do so right away. Jumping to child support issues. Has anybody here known of anybody who's dealt with administrative establishment of paternity through, or sorry, of either paternity or child support through Department of Revenue? No?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. Department of Revenue has an administrative procedure that is not available to private attorneys. And it's one that catches a lot of people. Because what happens is they send a notice out. They're not even required to formally serve. Service by certified mail is considered acceptable in administrative cases. That catches a lot of people because they assume, well, sheriff's deputy didn't come out to my place of business and serve me. Private process server didn't come out. I can just ignore it. I don't have to pay attention to the Department of Revenue. What happens though is, if you don't respond to that letter from the Department of Revenue telling you that there is an administrative case, they will go forward and establish child support without your participation. Which means next thing you're going to know is your wages are getting garnished. And that catches a lot of people. An administrative order, if you don't handle it promptly, your only option is to appeal within 30 days or to move to modify it in the circuit court. Circuit court does not have jurisdiction over the administrative orders to change what's already occurred. You can't set it aside or appeal it to the circuit court. And trying to get into the administrative court to set it aside can be very difficult. Because unfortunately, DOR has a little bit too much control over the administrative courts. I'm down to 2 minutes. Let me make this quick. A couple other things to be aware of, just jumping on child support issues. You cannot contract away from child support in Florida. So if you know somebody who's had a divorce where they said, oh, well, you know what, if you agree to this, I'm not going to ask for child support from you. Or if you give me this, you won't have to pay child support. Here's the issue, because that happens a lot of times, and I've seen a lot of attorneys try and do that. If you're not very specific with how that was calculated, the person who has the children can always come back and ask for child support later on. Because child support cannot be contracted away. And if you're not very careful in the wording of that type of waiver or agreement of child support, you run the risk of not getting credit for whatever you bargained for there. So it's something to be aware of. If you know somebody who's considering it, I've done a number of those cases where we have entered into some agreements regarding waiving child support. You've got to make it specific so you can calculate it backwards. And I'm down to 30 seconds, so I will wrap up. Karen Howe with Brandon Family Law Center.